On the night when everything seemed perfect, a millionaire discovers that fate had the biggest shock of his life in store, and 3 little hearts about to arrive. If you enjoy stories like this, be sure to subscribe to this channel. We post new content every day. And now our story continues. The grand ballroom of the Sterling mansion glittered under the golden light of 3 Austrian crystal chandeliers, each one worth more than a suburban home on Long Island. 200 guests mingled among floral arrangements imported from Ecuador and uniformed waiters who served Dom Perignon as if it were water. The Christmas party of America's wealthiest family was in full swing, and all eyes turned to him whenever he crossed the room. Ethan Sterling Hayes was 32 years old and carried on his shoulders an empire that had begun with his great-grandfather, a Spanish immigrant, and was now worth $5 billion. Mining, agribusiness, tech, real estate, there wasn't a sector of the American economy where the Sterling name didn't hold influence, and he, as the sole heir, was the living embodiment of that fortune. He wore a custom-tailored Armani tuxedo, his black hair perfectly slicked back, with dark eyes. Inherited from his American mother, and the proud bearing that came from generations of men accustomed to being in command. But behind the perfect mask of the successful businessman, Ethan hid a restlessness that grew with every minute he spent at that party. There was an empty chair at the main table, a place that should have been occupied by her. Chloe Davis Hayes, ex-wife, mother of the children who were about to be born. The woman he had pushed out of his life 6 months earlier, when fear took hold of his heart and made him commit the greatest mistake of his existence. "Ethan, darling, you need to mingle," said Isabella Hayes Sterling, his mother, a 58-year-old woman whose Hispanic beauty was enhanced by jewels that cost a fortune. "A few key senators want to discuss the tax reform bill, and the German ambassador is asking about our investments in solar energy." "Of course, mother." His voice was automatic, polite, empty. Ethan took a glass of champagne and walked toward the group of politicians, greeting each one with the rehearsed smile he had learned as a child. He talked about GDP, about the commodities market, about the outlook for the coming year. His mind, however, was far away. It was in an apartment on the Upper West Side where Chloe was spending the final months of a difficult pregnancy, alone, waiting for triplets to come into the world without their father present. How had he reached this point? The answer was simple and painful. Fear. The same fear that had dominated his family for generations. The fear of truly loving, of being vulnerable, of repeating the mistakes of a father he had barely known. Richard Hayes, his father, had died in a helicopter crash when Ethan was only 8. But even in the few years they had together, the memory that remained was of a man who was always absent, always working, always prioritizing business over family. Ethan had grown up promising himself he would be different. But when Chloe announced her pregnancy, not with 1 but with 3 babies, panic seized him. "What if I'm just like him?" was the question that tormented him every night. "What if I can't be the father they deserve?" The irony was cruel. In trying not to repeat his father's mistakes, he was doing the exact same thing. Abandoning his family for fear of not knowing how to love them. "Ethan!" The cheerful voice of Jessica Vance pulled him from his thoughts. She approached in a red dress that had cost a small fortune and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I was looking for you." Jessica was his business partner, and briefly had been something more. An affair that lasted 3 months after his separation from Chloe, driven more by loneliness than by true love. Ethan had ended the relationship when he realized he was using Jessica to escape his own pain, but she still held out hope that they would get back together. "Hi, Jessica, how's the party?" "Perfect, as always." She moved too close, lightly touching his arm. "But you seem distant. Thinking about her again?" The "her" was loaded with disdain. Jessica had never hidden that she considered Chloe beneath the Sterling family's standards. A nurse from a simple family in Queens who had won the heart of the billionaire heir in a story that seemed more like a fairy tale. Until the day the fairy tale turned into a nightmare. "That's none of your business, Jessica." "Of course it is. We're partners, Ethan, and more than that, you—" "No, I've always been the one who understands you best in this family." It was partially true. Jessica came from an equally wealthy family, knew the unwritten codes of high society, and understood how to navigate the complexities of family businesses. With her, Ethan didn't have to explain the weight of carrying a surname that was a national brand. But for that very reason, he could never be completely himself with her. With Chloe, on the other hand. With Chloe, he had discovered what it was like to be loved for who he really was, not for what he owned. Chloe Davis was a nurse at Mount Sinai Hospital when they met 3 years ago. Ethan had suffered an appendicitis attack during a business meeting and was rushed into surgery. She was on duty in the recovery room, a 27-year-old woman with brown hair always tied in a practical bun, green eyes that sparkled when she smiled, and a naturalness that contrasted with the artificial world he lived in. "You're awfully dramatic for someone who just had a simple procedure," she joked the first time he complained about the hospital food. "Maybe because I'm used to higher standards," he replied, testing, to see if his arrogance would intimidate her. "Higher standards for hospital food? You must be new here." Her smile was genuine, amused, without a hint of subservience. It was then that Ethan realized he had found someone who wasn't the least bit impressed by his money or status. Chloe treated all her patients with the same kindness, from the billionaire businessman to the street cleaner who had been hit by a car. To her, he was just another patient who needed to recover well. During his 5-day hospital stay, Ethan invented every possible excuse to talk to her. He claimed pains that didn't exist, pretended not to understand the doctor's instructions, and forgot to sign important papers. Chloe laughed at his obvious attempts for attention, but always answered his calls with patience. "Why do you work in a hospital?" he asked on his last day, genuinely curious. "Because I want to make a difference in people's lives. I know it sounds cliché, but it's true." "And do you?" "Every day. Yesterday I helped a mother hold her newborn for the first time. The day before I held the hand of an 80-year-old man who was dying alone. Today I'm putting up with a cocky businessman who's faking being sick to get my attention." Ethan laughed. "I'm not faking, I'm just afraid to leave." "Why?" "Because then you'll forget I exist." Chloe studied him for a few seconds before answering. "Mr. Hayes, you own half of Manhattan. You're not the kind of person people easily forget." "Ethan," he corrected, "and you're not impressed with me at all, are you?" "Should I be?" The question was asked with complete sincerity, without malice or provocation. Chloe genuinely had no idea of the scale of his fortune, his family's political influence, or the power his surname carried. To her, he was just an ordinary man who had been hospitalized. It was the first time in his life that Ethan felt seen for who he truly was. He courted her for months, not with expensive gifts. Chloe refused anything she considered extravagant, but with simple gestures. Flowers from the mansion's garden instead of arrangements from a luxury florist, books she had mentioned wanting to read, invitations to dinner at charming but unpretentious restaurants. Chloe resisted at first. She came from a lower middle-class family in Queens. Her father was a mechanic, her mother a seamstress, and she knew they belonged to completely different worlds. But Ethan was patient, persistent, and gradually won over not just her but her entire family. Her father, Frank, a man with calloused hands and a generous heart, said at a Sunday barbecue, "This rich kid has good character. He might not understand our life, but he respects it, that's rare." Maria, Chloe's mother, was more direct. "If he makes you happy and treats you well, the rest is secondary. Money doesn't make someone a good person, but it doesn't make them a bad one either." They married in a small ceremony against the wishes of the Sterling family, who had expected a 400-guest event at the Plaza Hotel. Ethan insisted it be at Chloe's neighborhood church, with only their families and close friends. The reception was at her parents' house, with barbecue, soul music, and genuine joy. Those were the 2 happiest years of Ethan's life. Chloe brought a lightness to his existence. She taught him to value simple things, a leisurely breakfast, a conversation at the end of the day, a walk in the park without a security detail. With her, Ethan discovered he could be vulnerable, that he could share his insecurities, that he could be loved without having to play a part. But the happiness lasted until the day Chloe came home with a blood test in her hands and tears in her eyes. "Ethan, I need to tell you something." He saw the trembling paper in her hands and knew, even before he heard the words, "You're pregnant." "I am." Her voice was a whisper. "But that's not all. It's 3 babies, Ethan. Triplets." The world stopped. Ethan felt a mix of joy, terror, panic, and love, so intense he couldn't process it. 3 babies. 3 children who would depend completely on him. 3 lives for which he would be responsible forever. That night, while Chloe slept, Ethan lay awake staring at the ceiling, remembering his father. Richard Hayes always said family was important, but he spent 20 hours a day working. He always promised they would take a family vacation, but the vacation never came. He died without Ethan having a single memory of a real conversation with him, of a moment of true connection. What if I'm just like him? The thought tormented him for weeks. What if I can't be present? What if work consumes me? What if I don't know how to show love? Chloe noticed the change immediately. Ethan became distant, closed off, always making excuses to come home late. He threw himself into work with a sick obsession, as if he could escape reality by keeping his mind busy. "You're scared," she said one night directly. "I'm not. Ethan, I know you. You're terrified. I don't know how to be a father, Chloe. What if I can't do it? What if I screw everything up? We'll learn together. And what if we can't? What if I end up like my father?" Chloe held, his face in her hands. "You're already different from him just by worrying about it. Your father never even questioned himself." But her words weren't enough to calm Ethan's demons. Every day, the fear grew. With each of Chloe's checkups, each time he saw the ultrasound showing 3 tiny hearts beating, the feeling of inadequacy intensified. The end came during a terrible argument, 3 months after the pregnancy announcement. Chloe was in her 5th month, her belly already large, and she had asked Ethan to accompany her to an important doctor's appointment. He cancelled at the last minute for a business meeting that could have easily been rescheduled. "You're running away," Chloe accused him when he got home that night. "I'm working. Someone has to provide for this family." "Providing was never the problem, Ethan. Being present is." "I don't know how to do that, Chloe. I don't know how to be the father you all deserve." "Then learn. Stay here with me. Live this pregnancy with me. Make mistakes with me. But stop running away." "And what if I can't? What if I end up abandoning you like my father did to me?" Chloe looked at him with a deep sadness. "If you keep this up, you're already abandoning us." The sentence hung in the air between them. Ethan knew she was right, but he couldn't break the chains of his own fear. Instead of fighting for them, he chose the easier path: escape. The following week he asked for a separation. Chloe didn't cry in front of him. She just packed her things, moved back to her parents' house and said, "When you decide you want to be a real father, you know where to find me." Those were the 6 most miserable months of Ethan's life. He dove into work like a madman, expanding the business, closing deals, traveling the world. He dated Jessica briefly, in a pathetic attempt to convince himself he could move on. But every night, alone in his empty penthouse, he found himself imagining Chloe with her growing belly, preparing to be a mother of 3, facing it all alone because of his cowardice. He tried calling a few times, but always hung up before she could answer. He sent expensive gifts that she returned unopened. He paid all her medical expenses behind the scenes, but he learned through his lawyer that she had found out and was furious about his charity. Chloe had made it clear. She wanted nothing from him but his presence, and that was the one thing Ethan was afraid to give. "Ethan." Jessica's voice brought him back to the present. She was watching him with concern. "You're pale. Do you want to sit down?" He was about to answer when he felt his phone vibrate in his jacket pocket. He looked at the screen, Mount Sinai Hospital. His heart pounded. "Excuse me," he murmured to Jessica, stepping away. "Hello? Mr. Ethan Hayes?" The voice was a nurse's professional, but laced with urgency. "Yes, this is he." "Sir, Miss Chloe Davis is in labor. She asked us to call you." The world stopped. The laughter from the party, the clinking of glasses, the music from the string quartet, it all became a distant, muffled noise. Ethan looked around the luxurious ballroom, at the guests sipping imported champagne, at the family that represented decades of tradition and power, and realized that none of it mattered. "How is she?" His voice came out hoarse. "She's doing well, but it's a complicated delivery. The babies are coming a bit early. Can you come?" Ethan didn't answer. He simply hung up the phone and stood there in the middle of the party, feeling as if he had woken up from a long, confusing dream. Around him, life went on. People talked about politics, travel, investments. But for him, only one thing existed. Chloe was bringing his children into the world, and he wasn't there. "Ethan, what is it?" Jessica approached again, followed by his mother and a few uncles. "I have to go." "Go where? The party's just getting started." Ethan looked at her, then at his family, then at the 200 guests who expected him to play the perfect role of the successful heir. All his life he had done just that, played roles, met expectations, lived according to what others wanted from him. Not anymore. Chloe's in labor. The silence that followed was awkward. Isabella, his mother, approached, her expression controlled but clearly annoyed. "Ethan, you can't just leave the family's party to go after that woman." "That woman" came out of Isabella's mouth as if it was something dirty. The Sterling family had never truly accepted Chloe, always treating her as an outsider who didn't belong in their world. "She's my wife." "Ex-wife," Jessica corrected quickly, "and the mother of my children." Ethan took off his tuxedo jacket and handed it to a passing waiter. "Who are being born right now?" "Ethan," said his Uncle Arthur, a 60-year-old man who managed part of the family's business, "you can't just leave like this. There are important people here. The Secretary of the Treasury, ambassadors, international investors." "To hell with them." The phrase echoed through the ballroom, causing an embarrassed silence. A few conversations stopped and eyes turned to the scene. Ethan realized he was being watched, and for the first time in his life didn't care at all. "Ethan Hayes Sterling," Isabella said in a low but firm voice, "you will not embarrass this family by walking out of a party to chase after some nurse who—" "Stop!" Ethan's voice was harsher than he intended. "Don't talk about Chloe like that ever again. She manipulated you, son. She seduced you for your money, got pregnant on purpose to trap you. Chloe never wanted a cent from me. In fact, she returned every gift, refused alimony, and stayed away from me for 6 months. If she wanted to manipulate me, she would have done the exact opposite." Ethan looked around, seeing the faces of his family, some indignant, others embarrassed, all of them expecting him to return to normal, to prioritize the family's image above all else. "Do you know what the difference is between Chloe and everyone in this room? She loves me for who I am, not for what I have. She saw me at my worst, scared, insecure, vulnerable, and she still stood by me, until I was the one who abandoned her." "Ethan, you're being emotional," Jessica said, trying to sound rational. "Think about what you're doing. Your life is here, with people who understand you, who are part of your world, not with a woman who will never be able to keep up with you." That was the last straw. Ethan stepped closer to Jessica and said in a low but firm voice, "Chloe keeps up with me in everything that truly matters, and you've never understood that because you're also obsessed with money and status that you've forgotten what real love is." He turned to leave, but Isabella grabbed his arm. "If you leave now, Ethan, don't come back. This family has a reputation to uphold, traditions to honor. You can't just abandon everything on an impulse." Ethan looked at his mother's hand on his arm, then into her eyes. For a few seconds, he saw the woman who had raised him alone after her husband's death, who had worked tirelessly to maintain the family empire, who had always prioritized success above all else. And then he realized he didn't want to be like her. "Mother," he said gently, "for the first time in my life, I'm not abandoning anything. I'm running toward what really matters." He pulled his arm free, got his car keys from the valet, and walked out of the mansion under the astonished gazes of 200 people who represented America's elite. Outside, a light December rain slicked the New York City streets. Ethan got into his Porsche, started the engine, and for the first time in 6 months, felt he was doing the right thing. On the way to the hospital, a single certainty filled his mind. It didn't matter what happened when he got there. It didn't matter if Chloe would forgive him or not. It didn't matter if he could be a good father or not, he was going to try. Finally, he was going to really try. The speedometer read 80 on a street where the limit was 40. Ethan drove through the empty streets of Manhattan in the early hours of Christmas morning as if his life depended on it. Because in a way, it did. Mount Sinai Hospital was quiet in the early hours of Christmas morning, with only the lights of the emergency room cutting through the city's darkness. Ethan abandoned his Porsche in a spot reserved for doctors — there was no time to look for parking — and ran through the familiar corridors. This was where he had met Chloe, 3 years ago, where his life had changed forever. His Italian leather shoes echoed on the waxed floor as he followed the signs to the maternity ward. His still perfect tuxedo contrasted with his emotional state. On the outside, an elegant businessman. On the inside, a desperate man who had woken up too late to what truly mattered. "Can I help you?" The receptionist at the maternity ward studied him with curiosity. It was almost 1 in the morning, and it wasn't common to see men in tuxedos running through the halls. "Chloe Davis, she's in labor. I'm the father." The word felt strange in his mouth. 6 months of running from that reality, and now he had to own it completely. The receptionist checked her computer and pointed down the hall. "Room 12. But sir, she's in the operating room right now. The doctor will be out to speak with the family shortly." Ethan nodded and walked to the obstetrics waiting room. It was a small space with blue chairs and old magazines scattered on the coffee tables. On the television, a rerun of a Christmas special played softly. He sat down and, for the first time since receiving the call, had a moment to process what was happening. His children were being born. 3 children who would carry his DNA, his last name, who would look to him for protection, love, and guidance. And he wasn't ready. He hadn't read a single book on fatherhood, hadn't attended a single doctor's appointment in months, didn't even know how much the babies weighed, or if there were any complications with the pregnancy. "Mr. Hayes," a female voice made him look up. It was a young nurse with black hair and a kind expression. "I'm Sarah. I work with Chloe here at the hospital." "How is she? Are the babies okay?" Sarah sat down next to him, and Ethan realized the answer wouldn't be simple. "Chloe's fine, but it was a difficult pregnancy. She developed high blood pressure in the last trimester, and the babies decided to come a few weeks early. It's nothing critical, but—" She hesitated. "But what?" "She went through all of this alone, Mr. Hayes. Every appointment, every test, every scare. Just last night, she had to come to the hospital in the middle of the night because she was having contractions and she drove herself." The words felt like punches to Ethan's gut. Chloe, 9 months pregnant with triplets, driving herself to the hospital in the middle of the night because he was too busy keeping his distance to be there when she needed him. Did she talk about me?" Sarah studied him for a few seconds before answering. "Chloe is one of the best people I know. She never spoke ill of you, not even when she was in the most pain. But she also never hid that she was hurting." "What do you mean?" "Sir, can I be frank?" Ethan nodded. "We see all kinds of situations here. Absent fathers, single mothers, complicated families. But Chloe is different. She's strong, independent. But you could tell she was hoping you would show up. Not for money or convenience, but because she truly believes you're a better man than the one who abandoned her while she was pregnant." The words hit him hard. Ethan thought of all the nights he had lain awake, wondering if Chloe still loved him, if he had lost his chance to win back her trust forever. Apparently she still believed in him, even when he didn't believe in himself. "Dr. Miller." Sarah stood up as a man in blue scrubs appeared in the waiting room. "Mr. Hayes, this is Dr. Miller, Chloe's obstetrician." The doctor, a man in his 50s with graying hair and a serious expression, shook Ethan's hand. "Mr. Hayes, I imagine you're anxious. I'll be direct. Chloe is fine and the babies are being born now. We had to perform a C-section because one of the babies was in a difficult position, but there are no major complications." "Can I see her?" "In a few minutes. She lost a fair amount of blood and is recovering from the anesthesia. But may I ask you a question?" Ethan nodded. "Where have you been for the last 6 months?" The question was direct, seemingly without judgment, but loaded with meaning. Ethan realized Chloe must have told the doctor about their separation. "Running," he answered with complete honesty. "Running away because I was afraid of not being a good father." Dr. Miller nodded slowly. "I understand, but you're here now, and she asked us to call you. That means something." Before Ethan could respond, a baby's cry echoed down the hall, followed by another, and then a third. 3 distinct cries, small and intense, announcing that his children had arrived in the world. "Is that them?" Ethan asked, his voice thick with emotion. "That's them, 2 boys and a girl, small but healthy. Would you like to meet them?" Ethan followed the doctor down the corridors to a room where 3 heated incubators housed the tiniest human beings he had ever seen. The first was a boy with dark hair, his eyes shut, his tiny fists clenched as if ready to fight the world. The second, also a boy, was slightly smaller with delicate features that resembled Chloe. And the girl. The girl was awake, her dark eyes open, observing the world around her with evident curiosity. When Ethan approached, she turned her tiny head toward him as if she knew he was her father. "You can touch them," a nurse said. "Just be gentle." Ethan extended his index finger and touched his daughter's tiny hand. Immediately her minuscule fingers closed around his, holding on with a surprising strength for someone so small. That's when he broke down. The tears came all at once, along with a mixture of love, regret, and fear he had never experienced. Here was living proof that there was something greater than his fears, his traumas, his insecurities. Here were 3 people who would depend on him for everything, who would look to him as a hero or an example, who would carry his name and his responsibility forever. "They're perfect," he murmured, gently touching each of the babies. "They weighed 4 lbs 10 Oz, 5 lbs 1 Oz, and 4 lbs 3 Oz, the nurse informed him. Small, but within the expected range for triplets born at 36 weeks. They won't need the NICU, just observation for a few days." Ethan stood there for several minutes, alternating between looking at his children and trying to control his emotions. They were his children, his blood, his responsibility, his future. And Chloe had gone through it all alone, while he hid behind meetings and business trips. "She wants to see you." Sarah's voice made him turn. Chloe was awake and asking for him. Ethan followed the nurse to a recovery room where he found the woman he still loved lying in a hospital bed, pale and tired, but conscious. She wore a blue hospital gown and her hair was stuck to her forehead with sweat from the delivery. Even so, she was still the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. "Hi," she said, her voice weak but with a small smile. "Hi." Ethan approached slowly, unsure if he could get close. "How are you?" "Tired, but good. They're beautiful, aren't they?" "They're perfect, like you." Chloe looked at him for a few seconds without speaking. Then she pointed to the chair beside the bed. "Sit here." Ethan obeyed, keeping a respectful distance. There was so much he wanted to say, so much regret to express, so many promises to make, but the words wouldn't come. "Why? Did you come?" Chloe asked directly. "Because I got the call and—" "No, why did you really come? 6 months with no word, not answering messages, not showing any interest. And now you show up here in the middle of the night." Ethan took a deep breath. Chloe had always been direct, never allowing him to hide behind half-truths or elaborate excuses. "Because I realized I'm an idiot. Because I spent 6 months thinking I was protecting you and the children from my fear of being a bad father, when in reality I was being exactly the kind of father I don't want to be." "And what kind is that?" "Absent, like mine was." Chloe nodded slowly. "I know you're afraid of your father, Ethan, but you're not him." "How do you know?" "I abandoned you when you were pregnant. I let you face everything alone. I ran when you needed me most. But you're here now, only because someone called." Chloe reached her hand out to him, and Ethan hesitated before taking it. "Ethan, your father died without ever having this conversation with you, without ever questioning if he was being a good father or not. You're here, the triplets have been born for 2 hours, and you're already questioning if you can love them right. That already makes you different from him. But what if it's not enough? What if I can't be present? What if work consumes me What if you stop imagining catastrophes and start living one day at a time? Ethan looked at her, seeing the strong, wise woman he had fallen in love with 3 years ago. Chloe always had the ability to simplify the most complicated things, to find clarity where he only saw confusion. "I love you," he said suddenly. "I know." "Really?" "Ethan, I've known you for 3 years. I know when you're scared, I know when you're lying to yourself, I know when you're running away. And I know you love me. I never doubted that." "Then why didn't you come after me?" Chloe smiled for the first time since he had arrived. "Because love isn't possession. If you wanted to be here, you would be. If you didn't, I wasn't going to force you." "But," she squeezed his hand, "I always knew that eventually you'd realize you were in the wrong place." They sat in silence for a few minutes, just holding hands, processing everything that had happened. Ethan felt as if he were waking up from a long nightmare, returning to real life after months floating in a fog of fear and denial. "Can I ask you a question?" Chloe said. "Of course." "Where were you today when they called?" Ethan hesitated. "At the family's Christmas party." "Ah." Chloe didn't seem surprised. "And how did they react when you said you were leaving to come here?" "They weren't happy." "I can imagine. Did your mother say anything about me?" Ethan chose not to repeat Isabella's exact words, but Chloe read the answer in his expression. "She hates me," she stated without apparent bitterness. "She doesn't know you. And she doesn't want to. To your family, I've always been the intruder who seduced the rich heir." "And do you care?" Chloe thought for a few seconds before answering. "I care what you think of me. I care what our children will think of me. The rest," she shrugged, "the rest is their problem." Ethan smiled. That was what he loved most about Chloe, her ability not to let others' opinions define her self-worth, something he himself had never managed to learn. "Chloe," he said more seriously, "I want to try again. I want to be present. I want to be part of everything. I want to be the father they deserve and the husband you deserve. But I don't know if you still trust me." "Ethan, trust isn't something you give or receive all at once. It's something you build every day with small and big choices. You can promise me you'll be here tomorrow and next week and a month from now. But I'll only believe it when I see it. What do I need to do? Stay. When it's hard, stay. When you're scared, stay. When your family pressures you, stay. When work calls, choose to stay. And if I fail?" "You will fail sometimes. All parents do. The difference is whether you'll learn from your mistakes or use them as an excuse to give up again." Before Ethan could answer, the door to the room opened and 3 people entered: Isabella, his mother, his Uncle Arthur, and Jessica. They were all still dressed for the party, with expressions that mixed concern and irritation. "Ethan," Isabella said, trying to keep her voice low, "you left the house without an explanation, disappeared for hours. Mother, now is not the time." "Of course it's the time. You abandoned a party with important guests to be with my wife and my children who were just born," Ethan completed, standing up from the chair. Isabella looked at Chloe in the hospital bed as if she were an intruder. Chloe returned the gaze politely, but without submission. "Good evening, Mrs. Sterling," she said calmly. "Chloe." The reply was curt, formal. "How are the babies?" Arthur asked, trying to ease the tension. "Healthy," Ethan replied. "Small, but perfect." "That's good," Jessica said, stepping closer. "It must be a relief to know everything's okay. Now you can go home and rest." Ethan looked at Jessica, then at Chloe, then back at Jessica. "I'm not going home, Jessica. I'm staying here." "Staying where?" "At the hospital, with Chloe and the babies." "Ethan," Isabella intervened, "you have responsibilities. Tomorrow you have a meeting with Japanese investors. The day after. Cancel everything." "What do you mean, cancel everything?" "Mother, my wife just gave birth to triplets. My children were born today. There is no meeting in the world more important than this." "Ex-wife," Jessica muttered, but everyone heard. Chloe shifted in the bed, trying to sit up straighter. Ethan immediately turned to her. "Are you in pain? Do you want me to call the nurse?" "I'm fine. I just want to say something." Chloe looked directly at Jessica. "I know you don't like me. I know you think I'm a gold digger, that I seduced Ethan for his money, that I don't deserve to be in your family." "Chloe, you don't have to," Ethan began. "Yes, I do." She continued to look at Jessica. "You're right about one thing. I really don't belong in your world. I wasn't born rich. I wasn't raised in a Swiss boarding school. I don't know how to choose French wine. But you know what I do know?" Jessica raised an eyebrow, waiting. "I know how to love Ethan for who he is, not for what he has. I know he has nightmares about his dead father, and sometimes wakes up thinking he's not good enough. I know he likes his coffee strong in the morning, and that he hates social events, but goes out of obligation. I know he cries during sad movies and is afraid of driving in the rain because that's how his father died." The silence in the room became awkward. Ethan looked at Chloe with a mixture of love and admiration. "And you know why I know all this? Because for 3 years I was present for every conversation, every sleepless night, every joy and sorrow. You know the heir, the businessman, the sterling name. I know Ethan." "Very touching," Jessica said, with poorly disguised sarcasm. "But love doesn't pay the bills." "You're right. That's why I work. I've always worked, always supported myself, and I'll continue to do so. I don't need his money." "Then why did you come back?" It was Ethan who answered. "She didn't come back, Jessica. I'm the one who came after her. She could have raised my children on her own just fine, as she's been doing for the last 6 months. I'm the one who realized I was losing the most important thing in my life because of a stupid fear." Isabella approached the bed, looking Chloe up and down. "And what do you want from my family?" "For you to leave me in peace to raise my children," Chloe answered without hesitation. "And if Ethan wants to be present, for you not to try to stop him." "Our children," Ethan corrected gently. Chloe smiled at him. "Our children." At that moment, Sarah entered the room with a worried expression. "Mr. Hayes, I need you to come with me, please. It's about one of the babies." Ethan's blood ran cold. "What happened?" "Ben is having some respiratory distress. It's not serious, but we're taking him to the NICU for observation." Chloe tried to get out of bed, but she was still too weak. "I want to go with him." "Miss Davis, you can't get up yet, but Mr. Hayes can go." Ethan looked at Chloe, torn between staying with her and going with his son. "Go," she said, holding his hand tightly. "Go with our boy. I'll be fine here." "Are you sure?" "Absolutely. Go take care of Ben." Ethan kissed Chloe's forehead and followed Sarah out of the room, leaving his mother, uncle, and Jessica alone with her. In the NICU, Ethan saw his son, so small he could fit in the palm of his hand, connected to monitors and machines that measured his every breath. The baby was awake, his dark eyes open, seemingly unbothered by all the equipment. "It's normal," the pediatrician explained. "Premature babies sometimes need a little help regulating their breathing. It's nothing serious, just a precaution." Ethan sat in a chair next to the incubator and watched his son's every move. It was surreal to think that this tiny human being was a part of him, that he depended on him, that he would carry his name and his genetic traits. As he watched Ben breathe, Ethan made the most important decision of his life. No matter how many fears he had, how many insecurities tormented him, how many pressures he faced from his family, he was going to stay. He was going to be present. He was going to try to be the father his children deserved. "Hi, Ben," he murmured, touching his finger to the tiny hand. "I'm your dad. I know it took me a while to get here, but I'm here now. And I'm not leaving again." In response, the baby squeezed his father's finger and continued to breathe, each small, perfect movement, reminding Ethan that love sometimes comes disguised as responsibility, and that taking on that responsibility could be the first step to becoming the person you always wanted to be. 2 in the morning. Ethan sat in the plastic chair beside Ben's incubator, watching his son's every move. The boy was sleeping peacefully now, his breathing regulated by the machines, but Ethan couldn't close his eyes. It was as if, by looking away, something might happen to this tiny child who depended on him completely. "Mr. Hayes," a nurse approached quietly. "Would you like some coffee? It's going to be a long night." "Thank you." He accepted the cup of watery but hot coffee and continued to watch his son. In the hospital corridors, he could hear constant movement, doctors being paged, families arriving for visits, the typical sounds of a place that never sleeps. But here in the NICU, everything was silence and concentration, life in its most fragile form, fighting to establish itself in the world. His phone vibrated, a text from Jessica. "Your mother wants to know if you're coming home tonight. You have an important meeting at 9. Ethan looked at the message, then at Ben, then back at his phone. For his entire adult life, meetings had been the absolute priority. Million-dollar deals, international investments, decisions affecting thousands of employees. It all came before anything personal. But here, in this NICU, watching his son breathe through machines, Ethan realized that none of that mattered more than this moment. He replied, "Cancel everything. I'm not leaving the hospital." The response was immediate. "Ethan, be reasonable. The baby is being well cared for by the doctors. There's nothing more you can do here." He typed back, "I can be present, something I haven't been for the last 6 months." His phone rang. It was Jessica. Ethan declined the call and put his phone on silent. "A dad who doesn't disappear when things get tough," he murmured. To Ben, "That's who I'm going to be for you and your siblings." Around 4 in the morning, the pediatrician came by to do an assessment. Dr. Chen, a man in his 40s with a kind expression, checked all the monitors and made notes on his clipboard. "How is he?" Ethan asked. "Doing very well. His breathing is stabilizing naturally. We can probably take him off observation tomorrow and move him back to the room with his mother and siblings." "Are you sure it's nothing serious?" Dr. Chen sat in the chair next to Ethan. "Can I ask you a personal question?" Ethan nodded. "Is this your first child?" "They're my first children. Triplets." "Ah, I see. Well, Mr. Hayes, as a father of 3 myself, I can give you some advice. You're going to spend the next 18 years worrying about them. Every cough, every fever, every scrape will feel like the end of the world, but that's normal. In fact, it's a sign that you're taking fatherhood seriously. What if I don't know what to do? What if I mess it all up?" Dr. Chen smiled. "The fact that you're here at 4 in the morning, losing a night's sleep to be by his side, already shows what kind of father you're going to be. Trust your instincts." Ethan looked at Ben, who was now awake, his dark eyes focused on the NICU ceiling. "Can I hold him?" "Of course. You just have to be careful with the monitor wires." With guidance from the nurse, Ethan held his son for the first time. The baby was so small, he fit between his 2 hands, but he was warm, alive, real. Ben didn't cry. He just looked up at his father, as if studying the face that would be his reference for his entire life. "Hi, my son," Ethan whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm sorry it took me so long to get here, but I'm here now." It was at that moment that Chloe appeared at the door of the NICU, supported in a wheelchair pushed by Sarah. "Chloe, you should be resting," Ethan said, without letting go of his son. "I couldn't sleep without knowing how he was." She approached slowly, still pale and clearly in pain, but determined. "How's our boy?" "Good, breathing better. The doctors said he can probably leave tomorrow." Chloe reached out and gently touched Ben's head. "Hi, my love, Mommy's here." Ethan watched the tenderness on Chloe's face, the natural way she interacted with their son, and felt a pang of envy. She had spent 9 months talking to the babies, feeling their every move, preparing for this moment. He had 6 months of catching up to do. "Chloe," he said softly, "will you teach me?" "How?" "Teach me how to be their father. You spent the whole pregnancy preparing, reading books, talking to doctors. I don't know anything." Chloe studied him for a few seconds. "Ethan, there's no instruction manual for being a father. We learn by doing. But you know how to change a diaper, give a bath, recognize when they're hungry or sleepy. I don't know any of that." "Then we'll learn together." "Together?" Chloe hesitated before answering. Ethan, I need to be honest with you. 6 months is a long time. A very long time. I created a routine, made all the decisions alone, prepared myself to be a single mother. It's not as simple as you just coming back and things going back to how they were. Ethan felt his stomach tighten. I understand. I don't know. If you do. During those months, I cried many nights imagining what it would be like to raise 3 children alone. I asked myself 1,000 times if I had done something wrong for you to abandon me while I was pregnant. I doubted myself, my worth, my ability to be a good mother without a partner. The words were like knives in Ethan's chest. Imagining Chloe suffering that way because of his cowardice was almost unbearable. Chloe, Let me finish. At the same time, those 6 months made me stronger. They proved to me that I can take care of myself and our children without depending on anyone. And that's important because now when you say you want to come back, it's not because I need you, but because I'm choosing to give you a chance. Ethan processed her words carefully. Chloe was setting the terms for rebuilding their relationship, and they weren't easy terms. What do you need from me? He asked. Consistency. Not beautiful promises or dramatic declarations. Consistency. Being here when it's boring, when it's hard, when the babies are crying all night and you're exhausted. Being present for the little things, not just the big moments. And if I fail? You will fail. Every father and every mother fails. The difference is whether you'll learn and keep trying, or if you'll use failure as an excuse to give up again. Ben started to stir in Ethan's arms, making little noises. Chloe smiled. He's hungry. Let's go back to the room. I need to feed all 3 of them. The process of returning to the room was careful and slow. Ethan carried Ben, while Sarah pushed Chloe's wheelchair. In the maternity room, the other 2 babies were awake. Haley, the girl, was crying softly, while Gabriel, the other boy, observed his surroundings with curiosity. How do you do this? Ethan asked, watching Chloe position herself to breastfeed. A lot of patience and some luck, she replied, settling Haley in her arms. With triplets, it's always a logistical challenge. One is hungry when another wants to sleep, one has colic when another needs a diaper change. Ethan watched Chloe feed their daughter, impressed by the naturalness of a process that seemed impossible for him to master. Ben started crying in his bassinet, and Gabriel soon followed his brother's lead. Get Ben, Chloe instructed. Try to calm him. Down while I finish with Haley. Ethan picked up his son and tried to rock him gently, as he had seen Chloe do. The baby stopped crying for a few seconds, but soon started again, louder. He won't stop, Ethan said, starting to panic. Put him on your shoulder and pat his back lightly. It might be gas. Ethan followed her instructions, and to his surprise, Ben let out a small burp and immediately calmed down. It worked. He smiled at Chloe as if he had just discovered the cure for cancer. First lesson of fatherhood. Sometimes it's simpler than it looks, she said, switching Haley to her other side. Around 6 in the morning, when all 3 babies were finally asleep, Ethan received a text from his mother. Come home. We need to talk. He showed the message to Chloe. Your family isn't going to give up easily, she commented. I know, but I'm not giving up on you all again. Ethan, you need to understand something. Your family has power, influence, money. If they decide they don't want me near you, they can make our lives very difficult. What do you mean? Chloe hesitated. During these 6 months, some strange things happened. I was offered a promotion at the hospital that would have transferred me to DC. My parents got a visit from investors interested in my dad's auto shop, offering a large sum for them to move upstate. Too many coincidences. Ethan felt anger rising in his chest. They tried to get you out of New York. I'm not sure, but it was suspicious. Chloe, I didn't know anything about this. I know. That's why I'm telling you now. Your family will try to separate us again. Maybe subtly, maybe directly. You need to decide whose side. You're on. Before Ethan could answer, the door to the room opened. Isabella Sterling entered, followed by Arthur and 2 men in suits, whom Ethan didn't immediately recognize. Ethan, you need to come with me now, Isabella said without preamble. Mother, I'm with my family. Your family is in crisis. In 2 hours, the news that the sterling heir abandoned a corporate party to run after his ex-wife will be on every gossip site. Our shareholders are nervous. Our competitors are celebrating. Ethan looked at the men in suits. Who are they? Public relations advisors, Arthur answered. They're here to help with damage control. What damage? One of the advisors stepped forward. Mr. Hayes, you left a party with 200 influential guests to come to a hospital for the current situation. It projects an image of instability, of confused priorities. My priorities are perfectly clear, Ethan interrupted. My wife and my children. Ex-wife, Isabella corrected automatically. Ethan looked at Chloe, who was watching the scene in silence, then at the 3 babies sleeping in their bassinets. No. Wife Chloe, will you marry me again? The silence that filled the room was absolute. Chloe stared at him in surprise. Isabella turned pale, and the PR advisors exchanged desperate glances. Ethan, Chloe said slowly, are you asking me to marry you to provoke your mother? No. I'm asking you to marry me because I realize I never should have accepted the separation. Because I love you, I love our children, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving that I can be the husband and father you all deserve. Chloe studied him for a long moment. And what if your family disinherits you? If they kick you out of the company, if you lose everything? Ethan looked around the room, at the nervous advisors, his furious mother, his uncle shaking his head in disapproval. Then he looked at Chloe in the hospital bed, still recovering from childbirth, and at the 3 babies who were living proof that love can create miracles. Chloe, you're a nurse, you earn your own money, you have your own career. I can work anywhere, do anything. If we lose the family money, we'll work and build our own life. But if I lose you all again, I'll never be able to forgive myself. Ethan! Isabella exploded. You're talking nonsense. This woman is manipulating you. Enough. Ethan turned to his mother with a firmness she had never seen in him. Chloe has never asked me for a cent. She has never tried to manipulate me. She has never done anything but love and support me. If anyone is being manipulative here, it's not her. You're choosing some random nurse over your own family, Isabella accused. I'm choosing my real family, and Chloe isn't some random nurse. She's a respected professional, a woman of integrity, and the mother of your grandchildren. If you can't see that, the problem is yours, not hers. The advisors tried to intervene. Mr. Hayes, perhaps we can find a middle ground. A reconciliation could be viewed positively by the media, as long as it's managed well. I don't want to manage anything, Ethan cut him off. I want to live my life, not play a role to please shareholders. Chloe, who had watched the entire confrontation in silence, finally spoke. Everyone, please. I just gave birth a few hours ago. My children are sleeping. Either you lower your voices or you leave the room. The natural authority in her voice silenced everyone. Ethan, she continued, your proposal was beautiful. But marriage isn't a dramatic declaration in a moment of crisis. It's a daily choice, a constant construction, a partnership in the routine. Ask me again in 6 months, after you've spent 6 straight nights without sleep because of a crying baby. Ethan smiled. It was exactly the kind of sensible response he would expect from Chloe. All right, but can I stay here with you all for these 6 months? Learn to be a father, win back your trust, prove that I've changed. You can, but your living conditions will be different from what you're used to. What do you mean? We'll live in my apartment on the Upper West Side, not your penthouse on Park Avenue. I'll go back to work as soon as my maternity leave is over. You'll split all the household chores and baby care duties 50-50. And if your family tries to pressure or manipulate us, you'll have to definitively choose whose side you're on. Ethan looked at his mother, who was clearly horrified by the terms Chloe was setting. I accept all conditions, he said. Ethan, Arthur intervened, be rational. You can't give up everything we've built to play house with this. Be careful what you say, Uncle, Ethan warned, stepping toward him. Chloe is the mother of your great nieces and nephew. A little respect wouldn't hurt. Isabella approached the bed where Chloe lay. For a moment it seemed she might say something conciliatory, but the words that came out were harsh. You know this won't work, don't you? Ethan was raised in another world. He's used to a standard of living you can never provide. Sooner or later he'll get tired of playing middle class and come back to where he belongs. Chloe looked directly into her mother-in-law's eyes. Mrs. Sterling, maybe. But if he goes back, it won't be because I tried to hold him with blackmail or manipulation. It will be because he chose to, freely. And you think that's enough? I think it's the only thing that matters. The conversation was interrupted by Haley, who woke up crying. Chloe immediately moved to pick up her daughter, but Ethan was faster. I've got her, he said, lifting the baby carefully. Hi, my princess. Daddy's here. Haley stopped crying immediately, as if she recognized his voice. Ethan rocked her gently, humming a lullaby his Spanish grandmother used to sing to, him as a child. Chloe watched the scene with emotion. Isabella, on the other hand, watched with an expression that mixed shock and something that might have been tenderness. He's good with her, one of the advisors murmured. Ethan was always gentle, Isabella said, almost against her will. Even as a child, he was careful with animals, with smaller people. It was the first remotely positive thing she had said about the situation. Chloe seized the opening. Mrs. Sterling, I know you see me as an intruder, but I don't want to take Ethan away from your family. I just want him to have the space to be a father to our children. Isabella studied her for a few seconds. And what if it doesn't work out? If he gets tired of the simple life and wants to come back? Then he goes back. It's that simple. You won't try to hold him? Never. Forced love isn't love. For a moment, something softened in Isabella's expression. Maybe it was the exhaustion of the long night. Maybe it was the sight of her son caring for her granddaughter with such tenderness. Maybe it was the recognition that Chloe truly loved Ethan, without financial interest. And the children, she asked, if you separate again? The children will grow up knowing they are loved by both parents, regardless of how our relationship unfolds, Ethan replied, still rocking Haley. And they'll grow up knowing their grandmother, Chloe added, surprising everyone, because regardless of the problems between us adults, they have the right to know their entire family. Isabella looked at her in surprise. Even after everything I've said about you. Mrs. Sterling, you spoke out of fear of losing your son. I understand that. I'm a mother now. I know what that protective instinct feels like. But Ethan is no longer just your son. He's the father of these children, and they need a present father. The silence that followed was different from the previous ones. It wasn't tense or awkward, but reflective. Everyone in the room was processing a new dynamic, a new reality where old positions would have to be renegotiated. Gabriel woke up and started to cry. Isabella, surprisingly, approached his bassinet. May I? She asked hesitantly. Chloe nodded. Isabella picked up her grandson with careful movements, and Gabriel stopped crying, observing his grandmother's face with curiosity. He has Ethan's eyes, she murmured. And Chloe's nose, Ethan observed. For a few minutes, the extended family stood there in the maternity ward, each holding a baby, trying to navigate the new emotional territories that were opening up. It wasn't complete forgiveness or total acceptance, but it was a start, until Ben, still in his bassinet, started to cry too. My turn, said Arthur, surprising everyone by picking up his third great-nephew. And there, on that morning of December 25th, as New York City woke up to another Christmas, 3 generations of the Sterling family gathered around 3 babies who represented not just continuity, but the possibility of doing things differently. Ethan looked at Chloe, who smiled at him for the first time since he had arrived at the hospital. 6 months, she said softly. 6 months, he confirmed. It would be the most important trial period of his life. 3 months after Christmas, the 2-bedroom apartment on the Upper West Side had transformed into an organized battlefield against chaos. Diapers were strategically stacked in every room, sterilized bottles occupied half the kitchen counter, and a complex shift system had been created to ensure at least one parent got a few consecutive hours of sleep each night. Ethan was sitting on the living room floor at 5:30 in the morning, Haley in his lap, trying to burp her, while Gabriel cried in his baby bouncer, and Ben miraculously slept in his portable bassinet. Chloe was in the shower, enjoying 15 minutes of relative silence before the morning routine officially began. "Shh, Haley," Ethan murmured, gently patting his daughter's back. "Mommy will be back soon." 3 months. 92 days of living in the unpredictable routine of newborn triplets, and Ethan was finally beginning to understand what Chloe had tried to explain at the hospital. Fatherhood wasn't a feeling. It was an endless series of small, practical actions performed with love, even when you were too exhausted to think straight. The apartment was small compared to the penthouse where Ethan used to live, but it had something the old place never had: real life. On the living room walls, photos of the babies mingled with drawings Chloe had made during her pregnancy. On the fridge, the schedule of doctor's appointments shared space with hastily written grocery lists. In the master bedroom, which now also served as a makeshift nursery, 3 small cribs took up all the free space. Ethan had resigned as CEO of Sterling Holdings 2 weeks after leaving the hospital. The decision wasn't easy, but it became inevitable when he realized he couldn't reconcile the demands of a billion-dollar empire with the need to be present for Chloe and the children. His uncle Arthur took over as interim CEO while the family decided how to proceed. "Are you sure about this?" Chloe had asked the night he made the decision. "Absolutely. For years I worked 15 hours a day and called it responsibility. Now I realize my real responsibility is the 4 of you. And what will you do?" "I'm going to start a consulting firm. Business management consulting. I can work from home, choose my clients, have control over my time." The idea had worked better than Ethan expected. In 3 months, he already had 4 regular clients, small and medium-sized businesses that needed strategic guidance but couldn't afford large consulting firms. His income was a fraction of what he used to make, but it was enough to maintain the apartment, help with the children's expenses, and still have some left over for simple luxuries. "How priorities have changed," Chloe had commented one night, watching him turn down a client who offered a lot of money but would require constant travel. "I used to measure success by the number of zeros in my bank account. Now I measure it by the number of first smiles I get to see." And there had been many first smiles. Gabriel was the first to smile consciously, one morning when Ethan was singing a nursery rhyme while changing his diaper. Haley soon followed suit, always smiling more for her mother than for her father. Ben was the most serious of the 3, preferring to observe carefully before showing any reaction. "He has his Spanish grandfather's temperament," Isabella said during one of her now weekly visits. His relationship with his family had gradually improved. Isabella still didn't fully approve of her son's choices, but it was impossible to resist the charm of her grandchildren. She came every week, bearing extravagant gifts: Italian designer clothes for babies who grew too fast to wear them, imported educational toys, and fine wooden furniture for the children's room. "Mom, you're overdoing it," Ethan said during one visit, watching her arrive with 3 state-of-the-art strollers. "They're my first grandchildren, and probably my only ones, considering you chose to have 3 at once." Chloe would laugh at these comments. There was a subtle irony in Isabella's voice that indicated she was beginning to accept and even enjoy the situation. "Mrs. Sterling," Chloe said one afternoon while preparing bottles, "you know you don't have to spend so much on them, right? They'll grow up happy regardless of the brand of their clothes." "I know, but it's the only way I know how to show affection." It was a touching confession. Isabella had been raised in a family where love was demonstrated through material provisions, not through presents or kind words. She was learning at 58 that there were other ways to love. "Then maybe you can teach them other ways," Chloe suggested gently. "Tell them stories. Sing them songs." "I don't know any children's songs." "I'll teach you." And so Chloe began to teach her mother-in-law how to care for her grandchildren in a more practical and less material way. Isabella learned how to give a bottle, change a diaper, and recognize the different types of cries from each baby. And slowly, very slowly, she began to grow closer to Chloe as well. The turning point in their relationship came one afternoon when Ethan was in a meeting with a client, and Chloe had to take all 3 babies to a doctor's appointment by herself. Isabella showed up at the apartment, offering to help. "You don't have to, Mrs. Sterling. I can manage them in a cab." 3 babies in a cab. Chloe, be practical. I'll drive you in my car. It was the first time they had been alone for more than 15 minutes. On the way to the hospital, they talked about trivial things: the traffic, the weather, the difficulty of finding clothes for triplets. But on the way back, after the doctor confirmed that all the children were developing perfectly, the conversation took a different turn. "Chloe," Isabella said, stopping at a red light, "can I ask you a personal question?" "Of course." "Why did you give Ethan a second chance after what he did?" Chloe thought carefully before answering. "Because I love him, and because I saw that he was genuinely sorry, but mostly because I realized he was scared, not malicious." "And you're not afraid he'll do it again?" "I am, every day. But fear can't paralyze you or you stop living." Isabella was silent for a few moments. "You're stronger than I thought." "I'm not strong, Mrs. Sterling. I'm just a normal person trying to make the best choices I can." "Call me Isabella. Without the Mrs." It was a small gesture, but it meant a great deal. From that day on, the tension between them visibly lessened. Ethan noticed these changes with joy and relief. For years he had felt torn between his family of origin and Chloe. Now, slowly, the two worlds were beginning to converge. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Adapting to his new life brought challenges Ethan hadn't anticipated. The first major test came when Haley got sick. A simple fever, common in babies, but it left Ethan absolutely terrified. It was 2 in the morning when she started crying inconsolably. Chloe took her temperature, 101.3 degrees. "We're going to the hospital," Ethan said, already grabbing the car keys. "Ethan, calm down. It's a low-grade fever. I'll give her the medicine the pediatrician prescribed and keep an eye on her." "What if it's meningitis? What if it's something serious?" "It's not meningitis. She doesn't have a stiff neck, no rash. It's just a little fever." But Ethan couldn't calm down. He spent the night awake watching his daughter, taking her temperature every hour, imagining catastrophic scenarios. Chloe tried to reassure him but eventually gave in and took Haley to the pediatrician the next morning. "A simple virus," the doctor diagnosed. "A couple of days of fever, then it'll pass. Normal for babies this age." On the way back, Chloe talked to Ethan. "You need to learn to trust the doctors. And me." "How do you stay so calm?" "Because panic doesn't help anyone, and because I've learned that not every problem is a catastrophe." It was an important lesson. Ethan realized that his tendency to anticipate the worst, useful in the business world, could be detrimental as a father. He began to consciously work on balancing legitimate concern with unnecessary paranoia. The second challenge came from accumulated exhaustion. 3 months of sleeping 4 hours a night, broken into 2-hour intervals, took its toll. Ethan was exhausted, irritable, and sometimes impatient with the children when they cried for reasons he couldn't identify. "I can't take it anymore," he confessed to Chloe on a particularly difficult night after Gabriel had cried for 2 straight hours. "Welcome to the club," Chloe replied, visibly drained herself. "How do you handle it?" "Because I don't have a choice and because I know it will pass. Everything with babies is a phase. What if I can't do it? What if I'm not strong enough for this?" Chloe stopped rocking Ben and looked directly at Ethan. "Ethan, do you think I was born knowing how to handle 3 crying babies at once? Do you think I don't feel like running out the door some nights?" "You do?" "Of course I do. But then I look at them, see how small and helpless they are, and remember that they didn't ask to be born. The responsibility is ours, not theirs." It was another learning moment. Ethan understood that being a father didn't mean having superpowers or never feeling inadequate. It meant persisting even when everything seemed impossible. The third challenge was professional. Ethan had underestimated the difficulty of working from home with triplets. Video conference meetings were constantly interrupted by crying. Reports were written in 15-minute fragments when the children slept simultaneously. Clients sometimes heard babies crying in the background of his calls. "Mr. Hayes," a potential client said during a particularly chaotic meeting, "perhaps it would be better if we hired a more structured firm." Ethan was about to apologize and offer a discount when Chloe appeared in the room carrying Haley, who had woken up crying. "Excuse me," she said politely to the computer screen. "I'm Chloe, Ethan's wife. I just wanted to tell you that my husband is the most dedicated professional I know. If he can manage a house with triplets and still deliver quality reports, imagine what he can do for your company." The client was impressed by Chloe's naturalness and confidence. He ended up signing the contract, saying he wanted to work with someone who knew how to prioritize family without losing professionalism. "Thank you," Ethan said to Chloe after the meeting. "You're welcome. But next time, don't apologize for being a father. Be proud of it." These small lessons were shaping the new Ethan. Month by month, week by week, he was transforming from a single-minded businessman into a dedicated family man. The change wasn't just external. Something profound was happening to his personality. In the triplets' 4th month of life, Ethan realized he had fundamentally changed when he received a call from Arthur. "Ethan, we need to talk. ExxonMobil is interested in a partnership. That could be worth $2 billion, but they want to speak directly with a Sterling. So talk to them. They want to talk to you. You're the heir, the face of the family. It would just be one dinner, 2 hours of your life." Ethan looked around the apartment. Chloe was on the floor playing with Gabriel, Haley was asleep on the couch, and Ben was in the experimental high chair Isabella had brought over. It was a scene of simple but complete domestic happiness. "No." "What do you mean, no?" "I'm not going. I'm exactly where I need to be." "Ethan, it's $2 billion. Uncle, let me explain something to you. For years, I thought money was proof of success. Today, I discovered that being present to see my son take his first steps is worth more than any contract." "You've lost your mind." "No, I've finally understood what really matters." After he hung up, Chloe commented, "Heard the conversation?" "I did. Any regrets?" Ethan sat on the floor next to her and picked up Gabriel. "On the contrary, I'm proud. For the first time in my life, I made a choice without being afraid of what others would think. And how does it feel? Free." It was true. Ethan felt freer than at any other time in his life. Free from family expectations, free from the pressure to keep up appearances, free to be authentically himself. The confirmation that he had made the right choices came on a simple afternoon. Ethan was working on his laptop while the children were taking their afternoon nap when he heard Chloe singing in the bedroom. It was a lullaby she had made up, a mix of English and Spanish, telling the story of 3 babies who came into the world to transform their parents' lives. He stopped typing and just listened. Chloe's voice was sweet, calm, full of love. Behind the song, he could hear the little noises the babies made in their sleep. Soft breaths, small movements, life in its purest state. Ethan closed his laptop and went to the bedroom. Chloe was sitting between the 3 cribs, singing softly so as not to wake the children, but ensuring they felt her presence. "Hi," he whispered. "Hi. Did you finish the report?" "I'll finish it later. Can I stay here with you?" Chloe made space for him on the floor. Ethan sat down and they stayed there in silence, watching their children sleep. "Sometimes I still can't believe they're ours," Chloe murmured. "Me neither, especially since I almost lost all of this." "But you didn't." "I didn't because you gave me a second chance." Chloe rested her head on his shoulder. "It wasn't a second chance, Ethan. It was the first chance for you to be who you really are." "What do you mean?" "For the 3 years we were together before, you were always trying to be who you thought I wanted you to be. Rich, successful, impressive. Now you're just you. A tired dad, a consultant working from home, a man who changes diapers at 3 in the morning without complaining, and I much prefer this version." Ethan kissed the top of her head, feeling a deep gratitude not just for Chloe, but for the entire life they had built together. "Chloe? Will you still marry me?" She lifted her head to look at him. "Are you asking again?" "I am, but for the right reason this time. Not to provoke my family or make a dramatic declaration, but because you were right. Marriage is a daily choice, a constant construction. And I want to make it official that I choose you and them every single day for the rest of my life." Chloe studied him for a long moment, seeing total sincerity in his eyes. "Then yes, but on one condition. What's that? We get married in my neighborhood church with the reception at my parents' house. No extravagance, no PR advisors, no politics. Just family and friends celebrating real love. Perfect. When? When the babies are a little older. When your mother stops turning up her nose every time I mention going back to work. When we're absolutely sure we're doing it for us, not to prove anything to anyone. How long do you think that will take? Chloe smiled, that same smile that had won Ethan over 3 years ago in the hospital. You'll see, it's already happening. And it was. Outside, New York City continued its frantic pace. Million-dollar deals were closed, empires rose and fell, and people chased after success defined by external standards. But here, in this small apartment on the Upper West Side, a family was solidifying based on simple values: presence, consistency, and love consciously chosen every day. Ethan looked at the 3 cribs where his children slept peacefully and realized he had found his true empire. It wasn't made of money or power, but of moments like this, simple, intimate, real. And it was worth infinitely more than any fortune. 2 years later, St. John the Baptist Church in the heart of Queens was decorated with simple flowers from the Davis family's garden. White roses, yellow lilies, and a few blue hydrangeas that Maria had cultivated especially for the day. There were no lavish ornaments or professional decorators, just the care of a family that knew how to turn simplicity into beauty. Ethan adjusted his tie for the 10th time, as nervous as a teenager on a first date. He wore a dark grey suit, elegant but not ostentatious, and watched the small church fill with people who truly mattered. There were no politicians, influential business leaders, or high society figures. Only family, true friends, and colleagues from the hospital where Chloe had returned to work part-time. "You're more nervous today than you were the first time we got married," joked Frank, who was serving as his best man. The relationship between the 2 men had strengthened significantly over the past 2 years, especially after Ethan proved his life change was permanent, not just a phase. "The first time I was playing a role," Ethan replied, watching Haley, Gabriel, and Ben play among the pews, supervised by Isabella. The children were now 2.5, with distinct and well-defined personalities, and they were absolutely enchanted by the wedding commotion. Haley, the most talkative of the 3, had insisted on wearing a pink dress just like her mommy's, while Gabriel and Ben debuted tiny suits that made them look like miniature versions of their father. The 3 had been trained for weeks by their grandmother Maria to toss flower petals when the bride entered, though everyone knew the actual performance would be a surprise. "And now?" asked Frank. "Now I'm being myself. And it's terrifying because it's real." The difference was clear to anyone who had known Ethan for a long time. The tense, appearance-conscious businessman had given way to a relaxed, present, and genuinely happy man. He had been working as an independent consultant for 2 years, helped Chloe with the children every morning before starting his workday, cooked family dinners on Sundays, and had learned to value achievements not measured in money. "Daddy!" Gabriel ran up to him, his little suit slightly wrinkled from playing. "Is Mommy coming yet?" "She's coming soon, son. Do you remember what you have to do when she comes in?" Gabriel nodded solemnly and ran back to his siblings, where Isabella was trying to maintain some order among the 3 future flower girls and ring bearers. Isabella's transformation was perhaps the most surprising of all. The woman who, 2 years earlier, had called Chloe an intruder was now the most devoted grandmother in New York, spending entire afternoons playing with her grandchildren, learning nursery, rhymes, and fiercely defending her daughter-in-law whenever someone made comments about her social background. "Chloe is an exceptional woman," she had said at a high society party in Manhattan when an acquaintance made a snide remark about Ethan settling for less. "My son had the intelligence to recognize that before it was too late." The organ music began to play, and Ethan felt his heart race. It wasn't the traditional wedding march, but a song Chloe had chosen, "You've Got a Friend" by James Taylor, played in an instrumental version. It was simple, joyful, and perfectly represented the spirit of the ceremony. They wanted authentic, American, and full of genuine love. The church doors opened, and the children's procession appeared first. Haley entered, tossing petals with exaggerated enthusiasm. Gabriel followed behind, trying to mimic his sister's movements, while Ben, always more serious, walked slowly, carrying the rings on a small pillow embroidered by his grandmother Maria. Ethan felt tears welling up just seeing his children participate in the wedding. When Chloe had suggested including them, he had hesitated. What if they make a mess? What if they cry in the middle of the ceremony? Then it will be perfect, she had replied. Because our family is loud, imperfect, and real. Why should the wedding be any different? After the children came the bridesmaids, Sarah, the nurse who had become Chloe's best friend, and Jessica Vance. Including Jessica in the wedding had been a joint and conscious decision. In the last 2 years, she had gradually distanced herself from the Sterling family business and built her own career as an executive at a multinational corporation. The process had made her reflect on her past motivations and realize that her obsession with Ethan had more to do with competition and status than with true love. "I want her to be a bridesmaid," Chloe had announced one day, surprising Ethan. "Are you sure? After everything that happened?" "That's exactly why. I want to show that I'm not afraid of her, that I trust our relationship, and that it's possible to transform rivalry into mutual respect." The gesture had deeply touched Jessica, who had since become a loyal friend to the couple and a devoted aunt to the triplets. And then, finally, the bride. Chloe entered through the church doors on the arm of her father, Frank, who wore his best suit and smiled with evident pride. She was radiant in a simple white lace dress, without a train or extravagant embellishments, but which perfectly enhanced her natural beauty. Her hair was down, with just a small tiara of fresh flowers, and she carried a bouquet of roses from her mother's garden. Ethan forgot to breathe for a few seconds. In the 2.5 years since the triplets' birth, he had seen Chloe in every possible situation, tired after sleepless nights, stressed when the children were sick, exhausted after double shifts at the hospital, happy on family Sundays. But there, walking towards the altar, she was absolutely perfect. "She's beautiful," murmured Arthur. "She always has been," Ethan replied, without taking his eyes off her. Chloe reached the altar, and Frank placed her hand in Ethan's with a meaningful squeeze. "Take good care of her," he said softly. "I promise," Ethan replied, looking directly into his father-in-law's eyes. Frank nodded and went to sit beside Maria, who was already crying even before the ceremony officially began. Father Michael, a young priest who had baptized Chloe and known her family for years, smiled at the couple. "Welcome, everyone, to this celebration of love. Ethan and Chloe have been married for over 4 years and have 3 beautiful children, but they wanted to renew their vows here, in the church where Chloe grew up, with the people who truly matter to them." It was true. Technically, their civil marriage remained valid, but the couple had decided to have a religious ceremony as a symbol of a conscious and mature new beginning. "Ethan," said the priest, "would you like to speak first?" Ethan took a deep breath and looked at Chloe. They had written personal vows, but now, standing in front of her, the memorized words seemed inadequate. "Chloe," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "3 years ago I almost lost you and our children because of fear. Fear of not being good enough, of repeating mistakes that weren't even mine. Today, I realize that fear never completely disappears, but I've learned that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing to love in spite of it." He paused, looking at his 3 children sitting in the front pew next to Isabella. "You taught me that a real man isn't someone who never fails, but someone who learns from his mistakes and stays. You taught me that success isn't measured in money but in present moments. You taught me that family isn't an obligation, but a daily choice made with joy." His voice wavered slightly, but he continued, "I promise to choose you and them every single day. I promise to be present for the small things and the big moments. I promise that when fear comes, I will share it with you instead of running away. And I promise that our children will grow up knowing that true love exists, because they will see us living it every day." Chloe was now crying openly, trying to wipe away her tears with her free hand. "My turn?" she asked the priest, who nodded with a smile. "Ethan," she began, her voice firm despite the tears. "You asked me to teach you how to be a father, But in reality, you were the one who taught me what mature love is. You taught me that we don't have to be perfect to deserve happiness, that vulnerability is strength, not weakness, and that a true family is built with patience and daily work. She looked at Haley, who had stood up and was waving at her from the front pew. When our children were born, I was afraid of raising them alone. Today I know I was never alone because you chose to stay, not out of obligation, not out of pressure, but out of true love. And that made all the difference. Chloe took a deep breath and continued. I promise to continue being your partner in everything, in the easy times and the hard times, when we agree and when we need to compromise. I promise that our home will always be a place of welcome, where you and our children can be authentically yourselves, and I promise that I will always remind you of how brave you are, whenever fear tries to convince you otherwise. The priest asked for the rings, and Ben stood up solemnly to deliver them, causing affectionate laughter from the small congregation. Ethan, do you take Chloe to be your wife, to love and respect her in joy and in sorrow, in sickness and in health, for all the days of your life? I do. Chloe, do you take Ethan to be your husband, to love and respect him in joy and in sorrow, in sickness and in health, for all the days of your life? I do. The rings were exchanged, the same ones they had worn in their first marriage, but which now carried a completely different meaning. I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride. The kiss was gentle, emotional, and was interrupted by Haley shouting hooray and clapping her hands, quickly imitated by her brothers and the entire church. The reception took place in the backyard of Chloe's parents' house, which had been decorated with string lights hung in the trees and wooden tables covered with embroidered tablecloths made by the family. The menu was genuinely American: barbecue, coleslaw, cornbread, Maria's famous apple pie, and a three-tiered cake that looked more like a culinary work of art. Very different from the first wedding, commented Isabella, sitting next to Maria at a table that mixed mothers-in-law, relatives, and friends in a harmony that would have been impossible years before. Better? Asked Maria. Isabella looked around, at Ethan dancing with Haley in his arms while Gabriel and Ben tried to follow his steps, at Chloe chatting animatedly with nurses from the hospital, at the simple but genuinely joyful party. Much better, more real. The evening continued with live music, a guitarist friend, of the family playing classic American folk songs, dancing, plenty of food, and conversations that stretched late into the night. The children played freely in the yard until they fell asleep in the arms of their parents and relatives. Around 11 at night, Ethan and Chloe managed a few minutes alone, sitting on the swings that Frank had hung from a century-old maple tree at the back of the yard. Satisfied? Asked Ethan. More than satisfied. Fulfilled. Chloe adjusted her dress and smiled. You know what moves me the most? What? That our children will grow up with the memory of this party. They'll remember that their parents got married surrounded by people who truly love them, at a simple but joyful celebration. It's a good foundation for them to understand what true love is. Ethan swung gently, watching the party continue in the distance. Chloe, can I ask you a question? Always. Do you regret anything? Giving me a second chance? Agreeing to start over? Chloe thought for a few seconds before answering. You know what my only regret is? What? That it took me so long to realize that true love isn't about not having problems. It's about facing the problems together. What do you mean? During our first marriage, I kept waiting for you to be perfect. I got frustrated when you worked too much, when you were scared, when you didn't know how to express your feelings. I thought true love meant no conflicts. And now? Now I know that true love is about how we resolve conflicts. It's about you telling me when you're scared instead of running away. It's about me supporting you when you're insecure instead of demanding you always be strong. It's about building solutions together. Ethan stopped the swing and looked at her. Thank you. For what? For growing with me. For being patient with my fears. For teaching me that I can be vulnerable and still be respected. Chloe got up and went to his swing, sitting on her husband's lap. Ethan, Do you know the exact moment I knew I could trust you again? What was it? It was one night about 4 months after you came back. Gabriel had colic and had been crying for 3 straight hours. I was exhausted. You were drained, and you said, "Chloe, I don't know what else to do." It was 2 in the morning. You were in your pajamas with messy hair holding our crying son and admitting you didn't have the solution. How did that give you confidence? Because it was the first time you admitted you didn't know something and didn't run away. You stayed there with me looking for solutions together until we figured it out. I realized you had learned that you didn't have to be perfect to be trustworthy. Ethan hugged Chloe tighter, feeling a deep gratitude, not just for her, but for the entire journey that had brought them here. And now? What comes next? Now, we live one day at a time. We work, raise our children, build more memories, we grow old together. Want more kids? Chloe laughed. Ethan Hayes, have you lost your mind? Aren't 3 2.5-year-olds enough? Just asking. Maybe in a few years. In a few years we'll talk. For now, our family is perfect just the way it is. They returned to the party, where they found their 3 children sleeping in a makeshift hammock, watched over by their grandmother, Maria and Sarah. Time to go home, said Chloe. Our home, Ethan corrected, liking the sound of the words. The apartment on the Upper West Side had been renovated the previous year. It now had 3 bedrooms, 1 for the couple and 2 shared by the children. It was small compared to the penthouse where Ethan used to live, but it was filled with life, love, and happy memories. 3 years later. It was Christmas Eve, and the Hayes-Davis family was getting ready for dinner at the renovated house in Queens. Ethan walked into the kitchen carrying Haley, now 5 and an absolute chatterbox. "Daddy, why do we celebrate Christmas?" she asked, playing with his tie. "Because it's the day Jesus was born, and it's also a time for us to be thankful to be with the people we love." "And why did you and Mommy meet on Christmas?" Ethan smiled. It was true that the triplets had been born on Christmas, and the family had created a tradition of celebrating not just the birth of Jesus, but the rebirth of their family. "We didn't meet on Christmas, Princess. You 3 were born on Christmas. That's when I learned how to be a real dad." "And when did you learn to be a real husband?" asked Gabriel, appearing in the kitchen. At 5, he was the most observant of the 3, always asking questions that surprised the adults. "Every day," Ethan answered honestly. "Being a husband and a father is something you learn by doing, one day at a time." Ben, always more reserved, entered the kitchen carrying a drawing. "What did you draw, son?" "Our family," he replied, showing a colorful drawing of 5 people holding hands. "It's a present for Grandma Isabella." Ethan looked at the drawing and felt a wave of emotion. There they were, he, Chloe, and their 3 children, not as a rich or poor family, not as representatives of social status, but simply as people who loved each other. "It's beautiful, son. Grandma will love it." Chloe appeared in the kitchen, already dressed for dinner, and Ethan was once again struck by her beauty. 5 years and 3 children later, she was still the most beautiful woman he knew. "Ready?" she asked. "Ready!" the children chorused. In the car, on the way to their grandparents' house, Haley asked another of her philosophical questions. "Daddy, are you happy?" Ethan looked in the rearview mirror at his 3 children in the back seat, then at Chloe beside him, and finally at the streets of New York lit up for Christmas. "I'm very happy, Haley." "Why?" "Because I'm exactly where I want to be, with the people I love most in the world." "Even though you're not rich anymore?" It was an innocent question, but it touched on a real issue. In the last 5 years, Ethan had left behind a billion-dollar fortune to live an upper-middle-class life. Technically, he was still an heir to the Sterling family, but he had transferred operational control to Arthur and contented himself with a modest income from family investments. "Honey, I discovered that being rich isn't about having a lot of money. It's about having a lot of love." "And do we have a lot of love?" "We sure do. More than we can carry." Chloe smiled and took his hand. "I love you," she said softly. "I love you too. All of you." The Christmas dinner at the Davis house was perfect. The large table accommodated the entire extended family, Ethan, Chloe, and the triplets, Frank and Maria. Isabella, who now spent every Christmas there, Arthur and his new girlfriend, Sarah and her husband, even Jessica, who had become a beloved aunt to the children. During dinner, Frank asked for everyone's attention to make a toast. "I want to thank God for this family. 5 years ago, my daughter was pregnant and alone. Today, I look around this table and see that true love always finds a way." "To true love," repeated Isabella, raising her glass. "To true love," everyone echoed. After dinner, while the children played with their presents and the adults chatted on the porch, Ethan and Chloe stepped away for a moment alone in the backyard. "Happy with how everything turned out?" he asked. "More than I ever imagined possible," she replied, watching Haley teach Gabriel and Ben how to dance to a song playing on the radio. "Any regrets?" "None. You?" Ethan thought about the question seriously. 5 years ago, he was the heir to a billion-dollar empire, lived in a luxury penthouse and had access to the country's most exclusive circles. Now he was a self-employed consultant, lived in a middle-class apartment, and his joys came from simple things like watching his children play or having dinner at home with his wife. "My only regret is that it took me so long to realize what really mattered," he said finally. "But you did realize it, and you changed. That's what matters." They stood in silence for a few minutes, just watching their family gathered together, the children laughing, the grandparents telling stories, everyone relaxed and genuinely happy. "Chloe," Ethan said suddenly. "Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for coming back. I'll always come back. I know, that's why this works." That night, after the children were put to bed and the house grew quiet, Ethan realized something. For the first time in his life, he wasn't thinking about the future with anxiety or reliving the past with regret. He was simply present, whole, grateful. In their bedroom, as Chloe brushed her hair at the simple vanity they had bought at a second-hand furniture store, Ethan watched her in the mirror. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, noticing his gaze. "I'm thinking that we made it." "Made what?" "We built a real family, based on true love, not on convenience or appearances." Chloe turned to him. "Ethan, can I tell you something?" "Always." "Do you know what the difference is between you and your father?" "What?" "Your father collected things. You collect moments." It was true. Richard Hayes had left his son a financial empire but no significant emotional memories. Ethan was building something different, a collection of precious moments that his children would carry with them forever. "And what kind of father do you think they'll remember me as?" "The father who was present, who played with them, who knew their fears and dreams, who loved them not for what they did, but for who they were." Ethan lay down on the bed next to his wife and pulled her close. "Thank you for teaching me how to be that person. You were always that person, Ethan. You were just afraid to let him show." And there in that simple bed in a small apartment on the Upper West Side, surrounded by the soft sounds of 3 children sleeping in the next room, Ethan Hayes finally understood what true happiness was. It wasn't about accumulating power, impressing strangers, or meeting others' expectations. It was simply this: being at home with the ones you love, knowing that tomorrow would be another day to build the precious life they had chosen together. And for the first time since he was a child, Ethan fell asleep without worrying about tomorrow, because he knew that no matter what came, they would face it together. After all, they had learned that true love isn't the absence of problems, but the constant presence for one another, and that, they discovered, was more than enough for a lifetime of happiness.